Kyle Johnson, Friday, October 30th, 1987. I remember that day like it was yesterday. My apartment complex was lame. That year, they didn't do trick-or-treating on Halloween night. They scheduled it for about an hour or two after school let out the night before. It had a lot to do with the building's demographic. Our building tended to run into three categories: the elderly, small families, and college students. Most years, Halloween was a big deal in our neighborhood. How we celebrated was pretty diverse. While most of the tenants were various Christian denominations, we had Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, and whatever else you could name. That was just how things were in the lower middle class parts of Balmer. Each group put their own spin on it. In years past, some of our Hispanic neighbors had really elaborate Halloween parties that went on for days. About a month ago, they complained to the manager. They were so holier than thou that they didn't care that this would inconvenience the Cohens, the Schwartzes, the Kaminskis, or the Abduls, all of whom consider Friday night to be the holy day of rest. Not to mention the Larsons, whose son was what these days we would call special needs. But this small group of parents were 1,000 times more adamant than the non-soul had. So management caved. They lobotomized celebrations even further by saying it had to be over an hour after sundown. We had to hit all 600 rooms spread out across 3 buildings in under 3 hours. To make matters worse, when the day came, none of those parents let their kid trick-or-treat anyway. Almost none of the parents did. Not 2 days after Jenny Wheels and her mom disappeared, there weren't kids roaming the halls dressed as princesses Roger Rabbit or Ninja Turtles. It was just 2 neighbors from down the hall whose baby had just turned 8 months old, who was going around in the obligatory pumpkin costume. My brother Daniel and I, and some rambunctious new kid who was dressed up as Batman. Even Danny and I didn't want to be out there. It just wasn't the same without Jenny. Most older brothers would be a dick when it came to doing themed costumes. They'd hear Star Wars and claim Han right away. Not Danny. He let me be Han. He'd be Luke. It seemed pointless without Jenny here. What good is Han without Chewie, Lando, or Leia? In any other year, families like mine who were lucky enough to live with both parents, or at least had a parent with a live-in significant other, would have at least one person to pass out their own candy, while the other parent went around with them trick-or-treating. When it came to trick-or-treating, the units with families were the worst ones to visit. They never got enough snack sizers, even on a year when no one was trick-or-treating. And the parents started eating their own supply by 6:30. I remember the year before. We were the last kids to get to the Andersons' apartment. Daniel and Jenny had gotten their candy. And that was it. They were all out. Even Charlie Brown got a fucking rock. I was the last kid of the night, the only one who didn't get candy. To her credit, Mrs. Anderson was working herself into a panic attack over it. I said it was no big deal, but I could tell she saw my disappointment. The next day, I was at People's Drug in line getting one of those weird variety packs of 5 old comic books for $1.99. There was an issue of Spider-Man on the front side and Batman on the back. I could almost see a Justice League logo on one of the other comics if I squinted. Even if the middle bit of the grab bag was a Jughead or Donald Duck comic, it'd be awesome. I couldn't let Danny know I still liked Donald Duck and Archie. I'd never hear the end of it. Miss Anderson was working that day. Before I could put my money down, she reached into her own pocket and paid for it and said, "Trick or treat." I went back to see if that grab bag with Teen Titans and that Transformers comic with Spider-Man was still there. The college kids weren't that bad. I mean, again, they were still giving you snack sizers. But they decorate. I remember these 2 girls over in Building C who would ask you to close your eyes and reach into a bag. They told you it was someone's guts, but it was just spaghetti. You knew it going in, but the presentation was so good that you didn't care. And sometimes you'd get these guys who worked at the comic book store or Toys R Us or something. They'd pass out stuff the store was going to throw away instead of candy. As far as trick-or-treating goes, the elderly were the best bet for candy. Maybe because they grew up in the Great Depression and wanted to give us the Halloween they never got. They grew up in a time when snack size didn't exist. Many of them gave out full-size bars. The downside is that most of them thought any time after 7 p.m. was too late at night. It would have been worse if we had done it on real Halloween when they had to get up early for church. Well, almost all of them did. When in doubt, there was always Mrs. Kowalski. She wasn't exactly elderly. She was one of those 50-year-old women who looked 35 even without plastic surgery. Nowadays, she'd be called a gold digger. She married a department store magnate who was in his 80s when he died. Only a lot of his assets were held up in trust funds because of a lawsuit with the old man's family. Until it was settled, she had a very small allowance. She was often tight on cash, but few people knew how she paid rent. And by a few, I meant all the high schoolers, college kids, and most of the adults in the surrounding 3 buildings, and maybe a few of the more astute middle schoolers. Us elementary kids were out of the loop. Mrs. Kowalski loved Halloween. She gave out full-size candy bars and boxes of Cracker Jack. Back in those days, Cracker Jack wasn't just really tasty caramel-coated popcorn. There were no virtual prizes or points to collect to get real-world items sent by mail. Along with your snacks, there were tops, whistles, baseball cards, decoder rings, all sorts of really cool fish. And after Halloween, she wouldn't have money trouble until February. But she loved Valentine's Day too. And that usually carried her to Tax Day, which carried her to the 4th of July. I didn't know why Mrs. Kowalski was the way she was until I was much older. In those days, I was confused why teenagers and college kids went to see her on Halloween. Once I understood where the money came from, it was no longer a mystery. Of course, by then I thought how embarrassing it must have been for the Baltimore Police Department. You see, she got her doctor to give her 3 times the amount of various prescription drugs than she'd need in a month. She would sell the excess Percocet and Vicodin to people around the building. And then she and the doctor would split the money 50-50. Of course, to make this more embarrassing for law enforcement, she lived 3 doors down from a Baltimore City police officer. Of course, this is Charm City. He might have been on the take. Oh, and Halloween wasn't the only thing Mrs. Kowalski loved. Maryland's age of consent is 16. So male or female, if you couldn't pay for your special candy but were old enough to have a driver's license, she would be willing to work out an alternative payment plan. Seems kind of pointless to obey consent laws when she could wind up doing hard time for the drug charges. Why worry about 3 years for statutory? Oh, wait. Who am I kidding? You have about as much chance of seeing a white woman at Towson Women's Correctional Facility for drug distribution as you do seeing a blind man at a strip club. But as I said, 9-year-old me wasn't aware of any of this. But my parents were. I didn't find out until a few years later, after my brother Daniel was arrested for possession. But again, we're white, so he got to plead out, as long as he gave up Kowalski in the name of her doctor. Of course, my parents knew about Mrs. Kowalski and never warned us. The whole thing could have been avoided. They could have done something years ago, or they could have warned us and avoided the whole thing. Knowing what I do now, I think Mrs. Kowalski was a horrible person. But to my childlike mind, she was an angel. But for every angel, you must have a demon. Well, if you believe in that kind of thing. I'm a die-in-the-wool capital A atheist now. Back in those days, I was sort of an agnostic. I believed in shit. Santa, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, Bigfoot, UFOs. So if something good existed, so did its opposite number. In our neighborhood, that demon was Mr. Wheels. Everyone in the building, child or adult, loathed him. The adults hated him for issuing noise complaints for kids playing out on the playground. He did the same thing to elderly residents who needed their home oxygen machines and other loud medical equipment just to stay alive. We hated Mr. Wheels. His wife was another story. She was such a nice lady. She'd give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. She'd help us fix our bikes if they broke. I remember one time my dad was on a business trip and Mom was sick. She took us to McDonald's for dinner. That was the first time Daniel and I got Big Macs instead of Happy Meals. She could tell I wasn't quite ready to give up on finishing my collection of McDonald's changeables. While the location a few blocks east would charge you $1 and just give you the toy, this one didn't do that. She pretended not to be that hungry and got herself a Happy Meal. She gave me the milkshake robot, and all was right with the world. Mrs. Wheels was the best on Halloween. She'd help my mom make our costumes. It started the first year Jenny was allowed to go trick-or-treating. Her dad was going to be away on a long trucking haul. Mrs. Wheels knew he wouldn't approve, but thought Jenny should do it at least once. So she made Jenny a costume of Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. To make sure her dad didn't find out, we hid the costume at our house. Jenny asked if she could borrow our Yorkshire Terrier Wendell so she could have a Toto. So then, my brother, who was tall and lanky for his age, decided he wanted to go with the Scarecrow. After that, I decided to go with the Tin Woodsman. My dad was going to chaperone so that Mrs. Wheels could pass out the candy. The only year the Wheels would ever pass out candy. And she made my dad a Cowardly Lion costume. But on Halloween, kids hated Mr. Wheels more than usual. He never gave out candy. He passed out Chick Tracts. If you're not familiar with them, they are creepy religious comics that are filled with racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic. Really, the only time sane people encounter them is on Halloween or at truck stops that are out of toilet paper. His particular choices for Halloween were on the wonders of Jesus and the satanic origins of Halloween. If an older kid came by doing trick-or-treat for UNICEF, as Daniel did every year since he was 8, Wheels went on some insane ramble about how the funds for UNICEF went to UN projects that created diseases like a form of super malaria, the new version of influenza every year, and even AIDS. If you tried to tell him UNICEF paid for vaccinations, he had an answer for that as well. Their true purpose was to weaken the human immune system and make it incapable of functioning on its own, and make it dependent on the government or big pharmaceutical companies for what we had once been able to do for ourselves. That was all part of this big plot by the Israelis, the Illuminati, and the New World Order to produce a docile slave race to replace the one America abolished in 1865. The only way to prevent their takeover was to arm ourselves. What a fucking lunatic. And that was what he was like before Jenny and Mrs. Wheels disappeared. He'd been even angrier in the days since. Our mom told us to not even go to his unit this year. We didn't know why, but we hadn't planned on it anyway. Without Jenny, we had no reason to. But what I remember most about that year was Mom getting hauled away by the cops. She was gone for hours. We asked her what it was about, and all she said was, "I did something that needed to be done." And that's that. It was never spoken of again. Kyle Johnson, October 31st, 2007. My parents still live in the same unit they've had as far back as I can remember. Danny was killed outside of Mosul. It hit me hard. I left school. At first, I told my friends and professors it was to help my mom and dad. But I didn't deal with my own shit. It took me maybe 6 or 7 months after that to even admit I needed help. A lot of it. But now, I'm back in school. I work as a handyman for the building's maintenance crew. Some of the guys have family and whatnot. They get high-end insurance for themselves, their spouses, and children. Me, I opt for insurance for me and a room. It's not that I don't love my folks, but trying to bring a girl home, I know, like that would ever happen, is a lot less embarrassing if you don't live at home. The manager stuck me in the Wheels old unit. We've had the same manager for close to 20 years. I guess he forgot Jenny and I had once been thick as thieves. Whoever handled Mr. Wheels' estate and hired the moving company didn't do a very good job cleaning up. I've been here over a year. I keep finding hidden compartments in the closet and the dining room shelves. You have no idea how many times I've called the police to come pick up some gun or ammo. Much of it, I later found out, were illegal to own in the state of Maryland. It wasn't until today that anything about Mr. Wheels made any sense. I was replacing my fire extinguisher when I found an envelope. It was full of photographs. It had pictures of Mr. Wheels, his wife, and Jenny. She'd been my best friend, and I'd almost forgotten what she looked like. Jenny, I said, calling her name. Her long red hair, her wide smile, those dimples, the way she always played Beethoven's Fifth instead of shaving a haircut when knocking on the door. It all came back. Mr. Wheels didn't believe the cops. He had come to the conclusion that they were dead. If they were alive, they would have come home by now. And when he gave up hope, he spent close to a decade and a half drinking himself to death. This unit sat vacant for years. Nobody wanted the apartment where a guy's corpse sat in a lazy boy watching ESPN for at least 2 months before anyone realized he was missing. He was already a religious fanatic before his wife and daughter disappeared. Of course, he was an alcoholic long before that, too. Great combo, by the way. It's easy to see how his life ended up the way it did. I could almost pity the man until I saw the rest of the envelope. I looked at the photograph of Mrs. Wheels. Her arms were wrapped in bandages, and that's when I realized, in almost every photo, every memory I have of her, there were bruises, cuts, where she was in some sort of pain. Every single one. My God! How did I not see it? How could my folks not tell me? There was something else in the envelope. A letter from a private investigator. It said that he found evidence in their disappearance, but none of it supported Wheels' claims. He was legally prohibited from revealing their whereabouts, given what he discovered. He said he was allowed not to reveal their discoveries, since Wheels' actions amounted to violating a court order. There was a copy of another letter. This one by Wheels, saying he didn't believe the investigator. There was another letter from the investigator, saying that he had done more digging. There were bodies found in Aurora, Illinois, that could have been Laura and Jennifer Wheels. Funny, my uncle lives there, and my mom hasn't let us visit there since I was 9. He and Aunt June always came here, or we'd see each other at my grandma's. There was a knock on the door. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Beethoven. I went to the door and this woman was standing there. For a moment, I thought it was a ghost. Medium height, long red hair, glasses, dimples, eyes that were just a bit too green. It wasn't Jenny. More like a younger version of her mother. Hey, on Halloween, there are no such thing as atheists. Hi, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I used to live here. I checked online. And it said it was my father's last known address, she said. Okay. Not a ghost then. I've never heard of a ghost that used the fucking internet. I'm sorry. He died about 2 years ago, I said. She looked at me with a smile. Kyle? Kyle Johnson? She answered. Yeah. Do I know you? I asked. It's me, Jenny. Remember? We were inseparable from preschool to 2nd grade. Your mom helped us when Mom decided to... Right, I'm not supposed to tell you. So I guess if he's dead, there's no real point in keeping it a secret now, is there? She said. What? Nothing. It's just I came looking for some piece of my past, but I guess there's nothing left to find, she said. Not entirely. I was doing some cleaning and I found something. Come on in, I said with a cough. She was nervous, but became less so with each step. She looked at the movie posters I had up on the wall. A reproduction of the early Revenge of the Jedi poster, It, the Terror from Beyond Space, Army of Darkness, along with the other Halloween decorations. She smiled. I handed her the photos and she wept. Thank you. There's no way I can possibly repay you, she said. She placed her arm around my shoulder. It was weird. It felt like both no time at all and a lifetime had passed since the October of 1987. And really the only thing that changed was I wasn't 7 years old anymore. And neither was she. And she had really filled in. You'd better move that arm. I've, always had a thing for redheads, I quipped. I remember. And if I'm making you uncomfortable, she said as she eased up a bit. I'm not uncomfortable. With that, I mean I'm uncomfortable with how comfortable I was there. Not with you when I stammered. She looked at the time and let go. Damn it. I gotta go. I told my friend if I wasn't out in 10 minutes to go to the movie without me. You can, come if you want. That is, if you're not busy, she said. I have to be here to pass out the candy, I told her. Please, please, please. If I show up alone one more time, she said she'd... Jenny said. What? Fix me up on a blind date next time. Ugh. If I'm gonna go somewhere with an almost complete stranger, I'd prefer it to be one I chose, she commented. I'm not a stranger. At least I don't have to be. Fine. Call someone to take care of the candy, she said. I got off my cell and called my folks. Hey, Mom. Something came up. An old friend stopped by. Can you take care of the candy? I asked. Sure, no problem, she said. Kyle Johnson, October 31st, 2009. And that's what it takes to get me into the churchyard at Westminster Hall. Because Jenny said if you were going to get married, it had to be at a church on Halloween. And I said if we're getting married in Baltimore on Halloween, we had to do it in style. Black suits for me and the groomsmen, black dresses for the ladies, and of course, we both decided that if we were doing a church wedding in Baltimore on Halloween, the only place to do it was near the grave of Edgar Allan Poe. And this is probably my best Halloween memory I can tell. Well, there's one more, but that's for another time.